Sarah reread the letter, and each line, printed in a strict bureaucratic font, seemed etched on icy glass. The envelope, bearing the address of a law firm, still lay next to the open message on the kitchen table. The morning sun, piercing through the light curtains, painted patterns on the white tablecloth, but Sarah didn't notice them. Her fingers, gripping the sheet, turned white. It felt as if the last flush was draining from her cheeks, along with the blood from her fingertips. Reading of the will. Mr. Thomas Miller. Kindly requested to attend. The dry words of the official document didn't align with the whirlwind of emotions rising in her soul. Bewilderment, a slight tremor, a strange, heavy premonition. She slowly put the letter down, her gaze wandering around the familiar yet suddenly empty kitchen. The faint scent of coffee, which she'd just drunk to shake off morning drowsiness, still lingered in the air. Now, drowsiness was replaced by a sharp, almost physical pain. "Mum?" Sarah's voice trembled as she entered her mother's room, hastily throwing on a robe over her nightgown. "Mr. Miller passed away." Her mother, Eleanor Vance, sitting by the window with her knitting, sharply lifted her head. Stitches slipped from her needles, but she didn't notice. Her eyes widened in shock. "Passed away? How can that be? I just saw him recently," she exclaimed. Then her gaze narrowed, and a familiar, displeased expression appeared on her face. "Just don't tell me that old miser left you his debts and loans. That old geezer. He gave you no peace when he was alive, and now he's decided to do something nasty even after death. Don't go there, Sarah. Don't go to that reading. You'll just get yourself stressed, and those cunning lawyers are just waiting for you to sign something." Sarah stood silently, her lips tightly pressed. Her mother's words floated past, not registering. One question pounded in her head. Why? Why did he need to include her in his will? The dry, lifeless text of the letter offered no answers, only tossed new riddles into the already tangled knot of her life. Her gaze fell again on the letter lying on the table, now with a different, more ominous aura. What awaited her there, beyond the threshold of the law firm, where a dead man so insistently called her? The letter from the lawyer, like an invisible bridge, transported Sarah back to the years she'd spent under the same roof as Thomas Miller. His image floated in her memory in vivid, unpleasant flashes, each steeped in caustic bitterness. "This isn't your house, Sarah. Not your house." These words, spoken with undisguised contempt, became the backdrop of her marriage, a constant nagging reminder of her inadequacy. He could toss them out casually, at the dinner table as Sarah served hearty stew, or as she hung freshly laundered clothes. It seemed he deliberately sought moments to sting her, to emphasise her status as an outsider. "You want money from our family? You're like a bird, always looking for a place to scavenge." His gaze was sharp, penetrating, like an X-ray trying to find hidden greed in her. Thomas Miller was the embodiment of stinginess and avarice. He saved, put aside, guarded his savings with the fury of a dragon protecting gold and treasures. This pathological frugality extended to everything, even to his own son, Sarah's husband, David, whom he always kept on a short leash, as if afraid he'd spend too much. Sarah initially tried to understand her fault. She hadn't given him any reason for such treatment. In 6 years of marriage, she'd never once asked for a fur coat or expensive jewellery, nor had she thrown tantrums over a lack of personal savings. She ran their shared home, cooked, cleaned, did laundry, created a warmth that it seemed no one but her needed. The irony of fate was that it was Thomas Miller and her husband David who forced her to ask for money. "We need money for cleaning supplies, David." Sarah would approach them with an outstretched hand, feeling like a humiliated beggar. David, her husband, preferred to wave her off. Go to Dad. He has the money. It's his house. He pays. And her father-in-law would immediately pick up, What? Came to milk me again? Spend your own savings. What savings? Sarah had never had any savings. One day, Sarah couldn't take it any more. The accumulated resentment and exhaustion erupted into a silent rebellion. Enough, she decided. I won't ask. I won't cook. I won't clean. For 3 days, chaos reigned in the house. David, accustomed to hot dinners and cleanliness, was at first bewildered, then irritated. Thomas Miller, when he finally noticed that food had stopped appearing on the table and dust was accumulating, exploded. What is this strike? His voice thundered through the house. Are you trying to blackmail me? You probably hid your money, and now you want us to feed you. Spend your own savings, I tell you. What savings, you cheapskates? Sarah blurted out, and immediately regretted her words. Her father-in-law merely smirked, his face contorted into a self-satisfied grin. He was absolutely convinced of his righteousness, that Sarah was a helpless girl who wouldn't last long without his money. David, he sharply snapped at his son, turning away from Sarah as if she were thin air. Deal with her yourself. You brought her here. And then, as he was leaving, Thomas Miller dropped a phrase that seemed utterly meaningless to Sarah at the time, but stuck in her memory. You can't see beyond your own nose, Sarah. He said it so calmly, almost with pity, which made it even more hurtful. What did he mean? At the time she chalked it up to another elderly eccentricity, a desire to wound her once more. Now, with the lawyer's letter in her hands, those words took on a chilling prophetic meaning. Soon after the memorable argument, as if by a cruel twist of fate, Thomas Miller fell ill. The sickness struck him swiftly and mercilessly, transforming the once authoritative and robust man into a frail old man. The rooms of the house, which once echoed with his lectures and criticism, were now filled with silence, only occasionally broken by his heavy breathing. David, accustomed to his father's guardianship and financial support, was forced to take over the firm's management. This new responsibility seemed only to worsen his already difficult temperament. The illness didn't soften Mr. Thomas Miller. On the contrary, it made him even more unbearable. He thrashed in bed, moaning, and sometimes, regaining a flicker of awareness, he'd spew curses and insults at Sarah. Get out! Get out of here! What are you staring at, you witch? He'd yell, trying to swat her away with his weakened hand, sometimes even attempting to hit her. It was difficult, very difficult, but Sarah, despite years of humiliation and hurt, continued to care for him. She spoon-fed him, changed his bed linens, patiently enduring his outbursts. In those moments, she saw not a cruel tyrant, but a frightened, helpless man, whose malice was merely a manifestation of despair and pain. One day, as Sarah, as usual, adjusted his pillow, Mr. Miller suddenly spoke, calmly and clearly, as if the illness had momentarily retreated to allow him to speak his mind. You're a fool, Sarah, a fool. You're David. He's cheating. He doesn't need you. Sarah flinched. The words were uttered so casually, almost indifferently, that they chilled her to the bone. She wanted to believe it was just the rambling of a sick old man. She didn't want to escalate the already tense situation with David, who was already on edge due to his father's illness and problems at the firm. She simply nodded, remained silent, trying not to betray her turmoil, and hurried out of the room. But her father-in-law's prophecy didn't wait long to come true. One evening, as Sarah, tired after another day of chores, was about to go to bed, the front door slammed, and David entered the house with her. A woman, bright, loud, with provocative makeup and a casually possessive demeanour. Her laughter echoed through the quiet house. "Sarah, we need to talk," David said, without a trace of remorse. His voice as cold as an autumn wind. "You know, I don't want a caretaker. I want attention. Understand? And Dad, well, he's only got so long to live." Sarah stood as if rooted to the floor. The shock was so profound that there were no tears, no screams, only numbness. She looked at their faces, at David, who had suddenly become a complete stranger, and at this woman, who was already making herself at home as if she owned the place. In her mind, like a broken record, the thought spun. My father-in-law, he knew, he warned me. "Pack your things, Sarah, and go to your mother's," David continued, as if giving her instructions, not shattering her world. Not an hour passed before David, without another word, shoved her few belongings into an old travel bag. A taxi was already waiting at the gate, its headlights cutting through the evening darkness. Before leaving, Sarah, obeying some inexplicable impulse, went to Mr. Miller's room. She needed to say goodbye. She entered quietly. Her father-in-law lay with his eyes closed. "Mr. Miller," she whispered. He opened his eyes, and something akin to recognition flickered within them. "They're throwing me out. David, he found someone else. I'm leaving. I wish you well, despite everything." Her words hung in the air, mixing with the faint scent of medicine. From the hallway came the ringing, mocking laugh of David's mistress. Sarah just sighed heavily. The taxi carried her into the night, to her mother, to a world that had suddenly become utterly foreign. For the next 6 months she lived in a vacuum, trying to come to terms with what had happened, as if undergoing an amputation of part of herself. David didn't call, didn't write. There was no word about a divorce either, and when the news of Mr. Thomas Miller's death came, Sarah wasn't even invited to the funeral. She was sure that, to them, she had been dead long before that. "Don't go, Sarah. Why are you even going? You'll only cause yourself more pain," her mother wailed, grabbing Sarah's arm at the doorstep. But Sarah just shook her head. In her gaze, usually soft, now burned a steely resolve. She wasn't going for an inheritance, not for money. She was going for an answer. Why had Mr. Thomas Miller, the man who had humiliated her and considered her a nobody her entire life, included her in his will? This was the only thread she clung to in the whirlpool of meaningless events. The taxi stopped in front of the law firm building. Modern and glassy, it seemed alien and cold under the grey sky. Inside, in the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense, almost palpable. Around a large polished table already sat strangers, distant relatives, presumably, and, of course, David. And next to him, conspicuously pressed against his shoulder, sat that same woman, his new partner, her face gleaming with anticipation. David, as soon as he saw Sarah, frowned. A sneer twisted his lips as he stood up and moved towards her. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" His voice was full of contempt. "Did you come hoping to cash in? Is my father really such a fool that he'd include you when you haven't been ours for 6 months?" Sarah met his gaze calmly, without a hint of emotion. "Your father included me in the will for some reason." Her voice was even, almost lifeless, as if she were reading a news report. David laughed, sharp and sarcastic. His partner giggled beside him. "Dad couldn't stand you. He only tolerated you, Sarah, just to criticize you." The certainty of a victor permeated his words. At that moment the office door opened and the lawyer entered, an older, grey-haired man in a strict suit. His appearance instantly brought silence, as if an invisible hand had pressed a stop button. The lawyer sat at the table, opened a thick folder, and in a detached, monotone voice began to read. I, Thomas Miller, being of sound mind and body. He listed names, figures, property titles. Each item floated past Sarah, leaving no trace. A coldness, a kind of inner numbness, enveloped her as she waited. Waited for something, though she didn't know what. A house, car and cottage are bequeathed to his son David. And finally, according to the last will of Mr. Thomas Miller, the company, a seaside cottage in the Sunrise community, and agricultural lands are hereby transferred to Ms. Sarah Davis. A resounding crash echoed through the office. David shot to his feet, knocking over his chair. His face was scarlet with rage and disbelief. What? Her? No way, this has to be a mistake, he shrieked, his voice cracking. The lawyer lifted his head, his gaze calm and cold. Your father personally left this disposition. He was of sound mind and memory, which is confirmed by medical reports and witness testimonies. Then the lawyer continued reading Mr. Miller's own words, words that resonated through every corner of the room. Ms. Sarah Davis is the only one who treated me with humility until my last day. My son, however, he disappointed me. He is left with only the house, the car, and the summer home. Everything he deserved for his indifference. Silence. Then came a quiet, broken sob. It was Sarah. Tears that hadn't fallen during her husband's betrayal, nor during 6 months of solitude, now streamed from her eyes. Tears of disbelief, relief, pain, and a strange, bitter triumph. David stood pale and trembling, his words about how he'd contest everything, dissolving into the air, sounding so pathetic against what had just unfolded. Sarah walked out of the law firm as if emerging from a long agonizing dream. The air outside felt unusually fresh and clean, and the sunlight, breaking through the clouds, was suddenly dazzling. She felt drained, yet incredibly light, as if a mountain of unbearable burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She had barely taken a few steps when a strong hand grabbed her forearm. David. His face was contorted by a mixture of shock, despair, and something Sarah barely recognized. Pleading. Sarah, wait, we need to talk. His voice was hoarse, nothing like the confident tone he'd used an hour ago. I was wrong, blind. Dad, he saw it earlier. I was a fool. He looked at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. Let's start afresh, Sarah. I promise I'll never make you cry again. We can build all of this together. My business, your business, ours. Sarah simply smiled. It was a bitter smile, full of weary condescension. He looked at her, and his naivety was almost comical. This man, who just hours ago had called her a beggar coming to cash in, was now suggesting they start over. David. Her voice was calm, even without a hint of anger or triumph, just a statement of fact. I'm filing for divorce, and that's where our paths diverge. She gently but firmly shook off his hand. This inheritance, Sarah swept her gaze around the law firm as if drawing a final line. This is payment for everything I endured, for the humiliations, for the tears, for every sleepless night I spent caring for your father while you were out having fun. She turned and walked briskly towards the waiting taxi. As she settled into the back seat and the car pulled away, Sarah felt a wave of serenity wash over her. The boomerang, so often mentioned in women's novels, had finally reached David. It had returned and hit him with the same force he had once struck her. Sarah closed her eyes. Ahead lay a new life, a clean slate she could now fill herself, without judgmental glances, without humiliation, without false promises. Only her, and her own destiny.